So we're recording. It's great to see everybody. And as always, I like to start with what Grace Pally, what she looks like. And here we go. And for the first time, there she is. So this is the one they have in Wikipedia. And I've been thinking to myself, do you get to pick the picture they put in Wikipedia? Because some of these old ones, I mean, that I think, there's one with books that was in the New York Times. Like, who picks those pictures? And she is very, very interesting, I think. And I do want to read a little bit about her. She was born in 1922. And she was an American short story author, poet, teacher, and political activist. Now, she did work at some universities and did not graduate from any college, wow. Which I know for that age period, women from that's not unusual. What's unusual, she teaches at universities. And and her alma maters are Hunter College, no degree, the New School, no degree. That you just couldn't get away with that in 2021. You couldn't say I didn't graduate or I wasn't there. And she was born in the Bronx to Jewish parents. And the family spoke Russian and Yiddish. They were kind of culturally Jewish, but she did have the cadence of Yiddish and Jewishness. And she was married to Paley and had 2 kids, and then got divorced in the 70s and married Robert Nichols. It says in Wikipedia, her sharp dialogue is marked by the rhythms of Yiddish, and her stories tend to reflect the shouts and murmurs of secular Yiddishkeit. And she began teaching writing at Sarah Lawrence College. Wow. Like, that is with no degree. That's, I don't know. It was in 1966, but still, I suppose having colleagues and knowing people at universities and how they try to get jobs and try to get teach writing. I just don't know how she did it with no degree. Maybe she had, and I know she had published stories by then. So I guess that's what. She was also a political activist. She was known for pacifism, and she, among many other causes, abortion rights, part of her broader feminist work. So she was a feminist. She was really somebody who, I think is very, someone I would look up to. Her Jewish background was a vital part of her identity, and she found community in her local synagogue in Vermont. Maybe she went with Bernie Sanders, just kidding, in later years. And the other thing that I found out, she died at the age of 84, but she had breast cancer. And, when you read that a Jewish woman dies of breast cancer, when you read anyone dies of breast cancer, but, I think that this is a Jewish disease, and that was very poignant for me. So that's a little bit. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I have to find it here, is just to give us a definition of what is Midrash. Because I think that's an important part of, this is an important part. So Midrash is an ancient commentary as part of Hebrew scriptures, our Bible, attached to the biblical text. The earliest Midrashim come from the 2nd century, we would say CE, the Common Era, although much of their content is older. So one Midrash, I gave it away. I'm going to stop my show. The one that we all know is Abraham and the idols. That story is not in the Torah. where Abraham is working in the idol shop with his dad. His dad says, watch the shop, I have to go out for lunch. He comes back and all the idols are smashed. And Abraham has put a club in the tallest idol's hand. And the dad said, what happened? And Abraham said, well, he clubbed all the idols. And Abraham's dad said, you can't do that. So, and then Abraham, why are you worshiping these idols? So for many of us, if you were taught, or maybe even our kids, the rabbi's Bible, if you remember that textbook, that had Abraham and the idols in it because it wasn't pure text. It had Midrash in it as well. And, with people of a certain age, I can say, Abraham and the idols, do you think it's in the Torah? They're all like, yes, yes. I said, okay, where find it for me in the Torah? So that is the example. And that was just a picture of Abraham and the idols. This is a midrash, and this is, there's other midrashim. I think that they're a lot of fun too. It's fun to study them and to teach children and have them do, make their own modern midrashim. So what did you think of the story? You can unmute and tell me, or raise your hand, or both. Judy, then Lynn. Salad.
I loved it. I thought being able to put words to an expressed desire is quite something when it's done this well. And I related to so much of what she said and found it poignant and touching. And I love the story.
Yeah, it was very sweet. Lynn. And then Brenda.
I did not love this story.
Oh, okay.
I am not a Grace Paley fan. I just don't like her style of writing. And my question came up, and I'm questioning why it's in a short story book. The question comes up about her reasons for writing this and what happiness, how it's defined. And I think at different stages of our life, we can redefine the concept of happiness as life goes on. So some of the things I agreed with, some I didn't, some I don't know. It just didn't hit me. Sorry, Judy, just didn't hit me right.
I would like, we're going to get to Brenda, but Lynn, I'd like to hear more about what you meant you don't like her style. What's her style?
I read it. I don't know if you remember, we were thinking of you doing a Grace Paley short story book. And I just found her obtuse and unapproachable. And I felt that she plays with words in a way that make her happy, but she's not that concerned about her audience. I mean, even in here, she's playing, I get this idea she's playing with us in her, what do I mean by this? What do I mean by that? And what do I mean by this? And it's just my, everybody has her own feelings about the style of a writer, and I'm just not crazy about her style. I think that she's circular.
Interesting. Okay, Brenda.
Well, what I was going to say has nothing to do about her style. I just thought her definition of happiness was kind of interesting. It didn't appear as though having a man in her life was the most important. She said the child came first, actually, and then she'd like to live with someone, preferably a man, but if a man didn't work out, a woman would be okay too. And I'm just wondering whether there might be some homosexual overtones in what she said. But she seemed to really value her friendship with women over, and you never hear her mention marriage. She mentions living with somebody, hopefully a man or woman, but she never really mentions marriage. So I'm just a little curious about that.
Although she does say, along with and not in preferential order, she required 3 or 4 best women friends to whom she could tell every personal fact.
Yeah.
And then discuss on the widest, deepest, and most hopeless level the economy, the constant, unbeatable, cruel war economy, the slavery of the American worker.
Well, I truthfully value the friendship of women. I think that it's very important to have women friends in your life. I really do.
Elaine, you need to unmute.
I think, first of all, when you said she was a feminist, so feminists do not need and require a man in their life. They are very self-sufficient. Number, I thought this, or they act like, I thought the story was wonderful. And I thought that it really had meaning for people our age. Because when you have friendships that go back years and years, and that you can tell people your problems or your warts, okay, and they look at you and say, okay, I still love you. I thought the story was wonderful. And I think it had a lot of meaning for people our age. I don't think my grandchildren would really understand it because they haven't lived through all of the warts. Anyway, that's what I thought.
Okay. Any other? I also think right on that first page on 290, when she's talking about the complicity of male people in the whole structure, the dumbness of men, including her preferred man, on this subject. By dumbness, she meant everything dumbness has always meant, silence and stupidity. By silence, she meant refusal to speak. By stupidity, she meant refusal to hear.
Mhm.
I think
And
that was wonderful.
right. And I don't think your grandkids, I don't think that young people would read that the way we do. I could be wrong.
No.
Lynn Sallet.
No, absolutely.
Right. And wait, Lynn, you're muted.
If my daughter, who is 42, read this, she would not talk about 4 best women friends. Her friends are male. And she would not talk about the things that they talk about. And I don't talk to my friends about the economy, well, I do, but not with my husband. I mean, if we're in a group, we talk about those things. If I'm at one-on-one with my female friends, we get intimate. I mean, we talk feelings. That's why this didn't appeal to me. And I don't think men are dumb. And I certainly don't think they refuse to speak. I think men are very outspoken. Whether they listen, that's another thing. I might agree with her on that. But I mean, there's some very deep male friendships that women have. And my daughter would probably attribute what she attributes to men to women.
I agree with you. I think that today, when you ask that, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Next, they have friends. And they don't differentiate between men and women.
Right.
And I think that in the synagogue, you don't have a sisterhood anymore. You don't have a brotherhood anymore. First of all, everybody's working and so on and so forth. But I think that next generation doesn't see those delineations. I could be wrong, but Judy and then Elaine and then Joyce.
That's why I think this is perfect for the time that she wrote it. And obviously her experiences as well. But in this day and time, women were women's best friends. And men, that's why she probably didn't graduate, is because there was a problem with women being able, in that time and place, getting a degree or having the ability to go to college and not have to worry about doing something else so that they couldn't finish in time. So I felt that a lot of the references she made were perfect to the time and place. And so that appealed to me. I also think it's interesting that she named herself Faith.
Oh.
Because we can have a whole discussion on that, but to me, that was a really critical part of the story because she called it a midrash. She could have called it a number of different things, but the fact that she used faith, especially coming from a father who wasn't interested in religion, I really felt it was I loved all the tying ends and the loops and the threads. But Lynn, I agree with you. Today's kids are totally different and see life differently. And frankly, we've adjusted to that too, which is why many of the things, not many, some of the things that she mentions don't apply to our generation in the same way they would have 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Elaine and then Joyce.
Okay, I really, when I think about it, do not have male friends that I am close with. I have friends of my female friends, husbands, who we're as a couple are friendly with. And my daughter, who is in her 60s, doesn't have male friends. My grandchildren, who are in their middle 20s, have both sexes. And I agree with Vanessa. They don't do, but I don't have a male friend. Years ago, I had a friend of mine that I worked with that was gay, and we were very good friends. He since has died, but that was the only male friend that I had. And that's why I preface it by saying I think her story appeals to people our age, not to the younger people. And you know, I certainly would not sit down with a male friend and discuss my feelings or anything.
Yeah, I see that. Joyce.
Just piggybacking on what Elaine said, I remember when I was much younger, I used to have platonic, if we all remember having platonic male friends and being able to set them up with our girlfriends and no romantic interest in them, but being able to have them as true friends and being able to talk to them and whatever. But then as we got older, things changed. Okay. And it was not a when a Harry met Sally kind of thing. And I don't, to go on with this story, Judy, you mentioned having the protagonist named Faith.
Yeah.
I don't know of any Jewish girls named Faith.
I guess not.
I found that a real anomaly.
Wait, Alice, you're muted.
I have one of my best friends. Faith, her maiden name was Faith Adler, Jewish.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I stand corrected.
I actually know another Faith Avner. And but also in Hebrew, emunah means faith. And there's a lot of women named Emunah, having just read House on Endless Waters by Emunah alone. And I don't think that's a pen name, but and it was a great book. Alice, go ahead.
Yeah. What I did like about this story, in a way, I didn't feel it was a story. I just felt like it was her stream of consciousness for a few minutes, but I enjoyed reading it. what I liked is I did like the mix of the personal and what's happening in the world, because I think especially now, the year that we all live through, with all the, all the stuff with the pandemic and all the social upheaval with the George Floyd and all the other stuff going on, I do feel that all of the stuff in the world has really affected me personally. So I just feel I liked that, first she was talking about her children or the man she lived with, blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing she was talking about war and peace and women's rights. But I like that part of it.
Okay. Judy, then Merle, then Lynn Whites.
On the last page, she talks about something that makes me think that refers to what Elaine was talking about. She talks about the tricks the kids will have to figure out in terms of the future. Our generation don't, well, maybe that's not true. The thought of putting it off for the next generation to take care of is definitely not the mindset of our generation now. So this was another indicator to me that, boy, when I came to that line, I thought, oh boy, that's how they had to think. That's how they had to think, because they didn't have any more hope.
Merle?
I saw something in the Jewish Women's Archives. It was an interview with famous ladies about their definition of happiness. And there were two, they're really short. Beverly Sills says, a happy woman is one who has no cares at all. A cheerful woman is one who has cares but doesn't let them get her down. That was from 1975. And then Fran Lebowitz, who is a very funny, dark comedian, kind of like Don Rickles, she says, there is no such thing as inner peace. There is only nervousness or death. Any attempt to prove otherwise constitutes unacceptable behavior. That was from 1978. So I feel like Faith is like Beverly Hills. She's got a Beverly Sills, I'm sorry. She has a positive view about it's possible to be happy. And Ruth is more like Fran Lebowitz. And I felt like Ruth is the one who thinks it's impossible to compartmentalize your personal happiness while tragic events are going on in the world. So it's like two possible ways to approach happiness. And one approach is that you cannot be happy.
Yeah. Which does, Fran Lebowitz has a Netflix with Martin Scorsese, and it's supposed to be fantastic. But she's very dry humor. I don't think she ever leaves New York. So it's just a fascinating. And of course, that's where Grace is from. Lynn Whites.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I really liked this story, but what I think I got out of it the most was that in the end, you need a good friend. And that walking arm in arm really got me, because I think of the older generation like that. My grandmother, she would walk with another woman arm in arm, and it really got me, because in the end, I can't solve every problem in the world. And I don't want my life totally depressing all the time, worrying about everything. Do you know what I mean? I'm concerned, but so it really boiled down to friendship and having that person to walk with. I don't know. I liked it very much.
Well, Joyce, when she brought up Harry Met Sally, I had to immediately Google it. And Harry says, you realize, of course, we can never be friends. Sally, why not? What I'm saying is this is not a come on in any way, shape, or form. It's that men and women can't be friends because the sex part always gets in the way. Sally, that's not true. I have a number of men friends and there's no sex involved. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Harry, no, you don't. I do. You're saying, Sally says, you say I'm having sex with these men without my knowledge? No, I'm saying is all they all want to have sex with you. Sally, they do not, do too. And then Harry, because no man can be friends with a woman that he finds attractive. He always wants to have sex with her. Sally, so you're saying that a man can be friends with a woman he finds unattractive? No, you pretty much want to nail her too. And Anyway, I'll never, that is, that's an old movie, but I always remember that's like a seminal part. Can you be friends? And the other thing that I was going to say about our kids' generation or younger generation is that they are also colorblind. And I mean, they're just blind. They're just friends. You don't say, my gay friend or my Black friend. It's just, the names. And, my mom, who's 88, don't tell her I told you this story. Whenever, like, she's had to see some doctors, you're 88, you have to see some doctors, and she always tells me what nationality they are. And I'm like, Mom, it's just your doctor. I don't need to know that he's Indian, Filipino, white. Mom, come on. And that just as, and of course, if she did that with my kids, they'd be like, Grandma. But that's just part of how she grew up. That's how people identified, and that's what you did, and that's what you said. And
Right.
of course, the older generation, trying to explain why, Schwarza is a bad word. They had, just a litany of bad words.
Yeah.
And, a goy means another nation, but sometimes it was used in a very derogatory way. And so, our kids are just blind to that. And I think that's a good thing. And we should give ourselves credit for our raising them in that manner. That's what I'll say. So on page 291, she says, suddenly she felt she'd left out a couple of things. Love. Oh, yes, she said, for she was talking all the time to patient Ruth, and they were walking for some reason in the neighborhood where she didn't know the children, the pizza places, or the vegetable markets. And I think when you think about their friendship, and, we have women friends, but we don't always live near them or know their neighborhoods. And maybe we know the North Shore, or we do know their neighborhoods, but it was different, I think, certainly for someone of her age who lived in the city. My mom grew up in Madison, and there, which is across the river from St. Louis. And on the weekends, she would go stay with her cousins, and they would, push all these, there'd be a ton of people in a couple of rooms, and it was hot, and they didn't have air conditioning. And she has fond memories of it, but my kids' cousins live far away. We can't do that. It's a different society today. And I'm wondering, I think during COVID, some kids did come back and live at home, and there was a little bit of a resurgence of living with your family. Any comments on that?
I have a question.
Yes,
Vanessa. I
sure.
want to get back to the word midrash.
Mm-hmm.
So you said it's a commentary attached to biblical text.
Yes.
So what text do we think this is in response to?
Right. Well, that is the.
Is this midrash more in terms of the feeling of a midrash rather than tied to a biblical text?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question about a midrash.
Shoot, go ahead.
Is a midrash a person's own feelings about that particular topic?
Yes.
So it is not meant to be universal. I mean, is it meant to?
The hard question.
Well, of course. I was a teacher. You only give hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is it meant to promote our discussion of what happiness is to us? Are we supposed to,
I think you're absolutely right, Lynn. And I see that Sue, and then I think Judy had her hand up. But Sue, and then we're going to come back to what happiness means to us.
So isn't it also an argument in favor of a point of view? As you're unpacking the text, is it not like an argument form, which is why this is kind of set up that way? By such and such, she means this. By such and such, she means that. Isn't that the quote Midrash form?
Yes, yes. Judy, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I actually, when I went and researched what Midrash was, because I was confused too. The Midrash are commentary not on the Torah, but on the Talmud.
oh.
Now,
okay.
I'm not smart enough to, the article said that the Torah is about kings and different category of discussion, whereas the Talmud is about daily normal interactions that we can relate to. And so I agree with Sue. It's an argument. She's making an argument, but the fact that she called it a midrash, I think she's throwing out ideas for what she thinks it is during her time frame, and that she's making the plea that we consider her options. I don't think she's saying, because the comment that she makes about to have the kids figure it out, I don't think she's trying to say that she has the answers. But I could recognize in her story the camaraderie that my grandmother and her sister had that was warm and tight, and they believed this. And this is what they taught me. So I related to the story.
So is Midrash, though, also meant to make you examine your own feelings and ideas about what the Midrash is saying? In other words,
I think so.
does she want us to feedback, to respond in a way to what she's saying? Or are we to take this as gospel or biblical? Or, I mean.
All right, so let's go back to what Merle, I'll get to. So you have Bible, which is Tanakh, which is Torah, the 5 books of Torah, Nevi'im, prophets, and Ketuvim, the writings, like, the Megillot, Esther and Ruth and all of that. And I think in all of Jewish learning, Talmud is it looks over everything in Torah and all of that. And then there's Gemara, which looks at the Talmud. So it goes on and on and on and on. And I think if you look there are modern midrashim, and one of my favorite modern midrashim, is the Red Tent. And that's by Anita Diamond. And it's a beautiful book. I loved it. And I think, she wrote that book so that we would look differently at the matriarchs, especially Leah. And, full disclosure, I think that when I found out she'd never been to Israel and she'd written that book, I was like, what? And I'm glad I didn't know that, because it's just one of my favorite books of looking at how, how looking at the Bible in a more modern twist, and made me think about Leah and Rachel in just totally different ways. And I hope that Midrash can do that. Merle, go ahead.
Well, I think everyone's discussed the meaning of the name Faith, but then there's her dear friend Ruth, who I believe is probably based on the biblical figure Ruth, who was a great friend to her mother-in-law Naomi, and a woman of great kindness and protection. And I think that's what this friend does for her. She listens, she comments, and she protects her. And she's not afraid to express a different opinion. So I thought the name Ruth was very significant too.
Yeah. But let's go back to what Lynn said. What is our idea of happiness? And I'll add another layer. After spending a year and a half in quarantine, has your idea of happiness changed? Or maybe it hasn't. Elaine.
I think that we're getting hung up on too many words. That Midrash is, I mean, she could have called the story anything, okay? And I think we're meant to look at our lives when we read this story and see what friendships is. And yes, I think that friendships have changed in the year and a half. I think we're not as scattered as we were and as busy. And I mean, I myself have sort of learned to stay home and not do all of the things. And also some of the things that I thought were so valuable, like shopping. I'm a big shopper. Were not interesting to me really anymore either, because I've spent a year and a half at home. And do I really need another pair of black pants? Aren't 12 pairs of black pants enough? And that you had to go out all the time and you had to make these friends and be friends and have a large group of friends. Sort of, you learn to come in a little bit. And I think that's what the story was about, that you can tell people your intimate secrets. I can't tell someone that I just met 6 months ago an intimate secret. They'd be shocked. But my other friends know me well enough. And I think that's what the story had to say.
Very interesting. Merle?
I was in Los Angeles last week and I asked my 3 grandsons, who are all teenagers who had school remotely for most of the year. Now they're back in school. I said, what was the worst part of the pandemic for you and what was the best? The worst part was not seeing their friends actually face to face. But the best part, they said, was not being transported all the time back and forth to so many places in a car. And they said they began to see how nice it was, just what Elaine said, just to be at home and relax and see your friends on Zoom if necessary. But they didn't realize you don't have to spend your whole life in the car being transported back and forth.
And have 50 million activities.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that with the kids. We see that with the kids all the time. Joyce, you need to unmute. And then Marcia.
When we had Thanksgiving remotely, instead of going around the table and saying, you know, the typical, what are you grateful for? I changed the question and I had everyone say, what were the silver linings of COVID for you? And the answers were really interesting. For Alan and I, the definite silver lining was discovering all the forest preserves around our house that we would drive to, park, and then discover all these fabulous paths that we would take and just walk. And in the different seasons, it was absolutely fabulous. For my grandsons, and this is going to sound crazy, they have spent the entire year at home. They have all opted, all 3 of them, to spend the year at home doing classes virtually. And it is the best year, they said, they have had. My son and daughter-in-law both work from home, and my daughter was absolutely ecstatic having the three boys there. They have had more fun. They're a very close-knit family, and they're not perfect, but they are very close, and they have had so much fun and have done more togetherness and had such fun doing projects that it's been a real mitzvah for all of them. And my daughter said she's going to miss them terribly when they go back to school.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Marcia Rosenbaum and then Lynn. Marcia, you need to unmute. Still need to unmute. And Lynn, you can unmute too.
It was in the wrong place. I'm coming from this from a different viewpoint in that for the last few years, I've been a widow and didn't have a lot of, I had some girlfriends, but not nearly as many as now I've needed women friends, and just the support that I've gotten from them. And what I've also observed are the women or the men too, that have good attitudes and have been able to go through this, not negative and not angry, has been enlightening to me and helpful to me. One of the closest people that I've gotten to know really well, she's going to be 98 this weekend, and she's amazing. And she's positive, and life is what it is. So it's been a whole different life for me the last few years, and has really enriched my life having girlfriends. So for me, this story, I could, and it certainly had to do with our age too, but I did enjoy it a lot.
Okay, great. Lynn, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to respond to Elaine in the kindest way, but the title is probably the most important part of any story. And an author spends a great deal of time figuring out what the title of a story should be. In fact, if you just take this title and discuss a story, you will get the entire meaning of a story usually. What I find looking through this several times is that she just doesn't say she wants friends. The word to walk, it's the last sentence too, to walk. And if you follow the flow of the story, she talks about war, she talks about different raising children, this and this and this. And then she reduces the definition to happiness to sometimes walking with a friend, I forget the world. And I think a lot of you were talking about, as Thoreau said, our life is frittered away by detail. I think we got rid of a lot of detail in our lives during COVID and reduced it to the most elemental activity, which is walking, and it's walking with a friend and getting back to the use of our senses. And I think that's, for me, was the heart of the story. I mean, of all the things I took from this story. And it isn't the number of friends you have, it's the friend that you can walk with arm in arm and get down to your basic feelings and not feel threatened or intimidated or judged. So, and it's a short story. So I think she got down to the elemental, basic definition of happiness for her. Of course, Faye said, I know all of that, all of this that she talked about. I do. But sometimes walking with a friend, I forget the world. And the world was what just, I'd walk outside and I'd say, oh my God, there's a virus all around me. I mean, I had to get rid of that thought in order to be at any kind of peace with myself. So to me, that was, and that's why I asked about Midrash. If Midrash is this deep need to make commentary on something that was important in your life, and I guess this, for me, that's what it was for her.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with that, Merle.
I agree with Lynn that the last sentence is terribly important in the story. And I just want to add one thing to that, that the last sentence gives us permission to experience some personal happiness, even
Right.
when all of this bellicosity is going on in the world. And I think that's a very optimistic and positive ending, that there are people who work for the Red Cross who do nothing but save lives day after day after day. But there are also people who, living a personal, quiet life, are also making contribution to the world. And this ending gives us permission to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lynn Whites, and you need to unmute.
I don't remember the other woman's name, but I too lost my husband. And I found this a very, very difficult year going through the pandemic alone. I mean, you can't even compare it if you have somebody in the house with you. I also would like to say that my grandchildren suffered. They're in elementary school, and I really think this pandemic affected them. They missed their friends. They spent too much time in their bedrooms doing their work. And I think it was a very hard year. I don't want to make it glossy. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to think it was so great, because I don't think it was great. Maybe we learned some lessons, but it was hard. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I have, I have a couple of girlfriends who died of breast cancer, and one in particular, and we try to take care of her husband because, I see that, I hear that from other congregants of, that the synagogue is a place made for couples, couples, social activities revolve around that. So we try to be very cognizant of that. But, between all of us in this group, occasionally I'll say to my husband, hey, just go out to coffee with him. Doesn't have to be the three of us. Like, he needs a friend. And I also think on the, and I love the silver linings of COVID. And, for all this year, we've been looking. But I also think that some people, I think we're going to see more divorces after this year. I think that, some people made it through swimmingly and some people not so swimmingly. And as far as our kids, I'm going to camp this summer, and I think it'll be absolutely fascinating to see. I think kids are resilient, but I think we're going to have to pay a lot of attention. I think that we're going to have to, just tread softly. We're not at camp. We're not having as many activities per day. We're trying to slow things up because we know that they've had a long year and a long kind of slow year, if that makes sense. So, Elaine.
I didn't mean to say that the last year was a walk in the park. It certainly wasn't, but I think it's a time to reevaluate. That's what I was saying. And what is important and what isn't important. And my granddaughter, who's a teacher, said that the teaching community absolutely lost a year. She's a junior high teacher. And she said it was very, very hard teaching remotely. And the kids really, for the most part, lost out on a year of education. But I have some friends who are widows, and they all say it was very difficult being alone. And some people reacted much stronger to the virus, not medically, but mentally, and the thoughts of it. So I think it's just an individual thing, and it will take us time to get back into who was important, who is not, who do we really don't like. And I agree with you, there will be a lot of divorces.
Yeah, I went shopping in Jewel and you don't have to wear a mask. And I didn't, but I was like the only person. I was the only person without a mask, and I literally felt naked. And I think people are going to have to reintroduce themselves to crowds, to coming into buildings, to doing things in person. And it's, we have to, we're certainly trying to think about that in a very careful way at Macomb Sola Lakeside, but I probably next time I go into the Jewel, I'm going to wear a mask because I felt uncomfortable without the mask on.
You know what? I keep a couple of them in my purse now.
Yeah.
And when I get out of the car, I look around the parking lot and see who is wearing them. But one of the things that really got to me about the pandemic was in the height of it, when you'd walk down the street and someone would step into the street to avoid being with you. And that really, really got me. I mean, so, are we afraid to be with people? Someone asked us if we were going out to dinner, if we would go out to dinner with them, and inside or out.
It's a big thing. It's a big thing.
Everything is a decision nowadays.
Yeah.
And things that you thought were normal, you have to think about doing still.
Yeah. Judy.
We had a very bad year in our family. We had a death and injury, and it was a very difficult year. But I learned something really, really important. I am the most impatient person you've ever met in your whole life. I have to do something immediately when it happens or take care of it immediately. I have learned patience. And it was a struggle. And I fought it most of the way. But I think we will all come away from this with lessons learned that are both positive and recognize those things that were negative. And so for that, it's been a benefit, I think, to most people, not everyone. But there were things to be learned. And if we could walk away and say we've learned some of them, or we've tried to learn some of them, or we've looked for some of them, I think that's all in our favor.
Lynn, and you need to unmute. Lynn Salad.
Piggybacking on what Judy said, my lesson taps into what Grace Paley said. In what can make you happy, it doesn't have to involve money. I mean, we found, we were with our kids in California, and we did a tremendous amount of hiking, and it was so much fun being with people, being in nature, challenging your body. I mean, there's so many things that could make us happy that would not involve technology, money, the things that the world has provided us to make us more comfortable. And because we were away from, I mean, the kids were unfortunately glued to the technology because they had to be. But for us, for adults, except my kids, they learned the lesson also about hiking. And now they're back in Chicago and they're looking for hiking trails all over. So, there are upsides and downsides to it. And unfortunately, the downsides were pretty tragic. So for those of us who came out of it somewhat whole, it's a lesson to be learned about what can make you happy.
Yeah, absolutely. In the last paragraph, it says, then Faith was ashamed to have wanted so much and so little all at the same time, to be so easily and personally satisfied in this terrible place, when everywhere vast public suffering rose in reeling waves from round the earth's nations, states, hung in the satellite watched air, and settled in no time at all into TV sets and newsrooms. And, I think I don't know. I do think there is some beautiful writing there. I also, too bad I couldn't find this before this today, but in the chat, this is Eve Ensler reading this story. And Eve Ensler was the author of the Vagina Monologues, which, I went to go see, I don't know, was that 20, 30 years ago? I remember the theater. I don't always remember all the things I've seen, but that I remember. And so if you want to listen to it again, and I thank you all for sharing and being our friends and talking about these intimate things and how COVID has gone for us. And so we are going to meet again in 2 weeks. The reopening committee will let us know if we can meet in person, and that'll probably wait until the fall. And, as always, I'll send stuff on email and let you know what the story is and what our next book will be and so on and so forth. So it was great to
Thank you,
see everybody.
Vanessa.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.